You're listening to the Final Say Radio Show, a Rappaport Media production, with your host Brett Rappaport and co-host John Rappaport.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have our good friend from the Heritage Foundation, Ariel Cohen. He is a senior research fellow for Russian and Eurasian Studies and International Energy Policy with the Catherine and Shelby Cullum Davis Institute for International Studies. Ariel Cohen, it's great to have you back on the program.
It's always a pleasure, guys. I love your show.
Oh, thank you very much. Ariel, it's we've got so much to discuss, and we'll never have enough time for what's going on in the Middle East today. But if we can, let's go right to Egypt. I guess we all could expect this to have unfolded in a similar manner. The transition, if you will, regardless of how it came about, from the Morsi government to the current temporary government. And, of course, the Muslim Brotherhood isn't happy, which we would expect. And there's a lot of violence in the streets. Yeah. And, on one hand, you have the government trying to get control, and you have the Morsi representatives and the Muslim Brotherhood trying to hold on to what they had just a few weeks ago.
Absolutely. And you also notice that there is very little coverage of some of the horrendous stuff that the Muslim Brotherhood has done. For example, over 50 churches were attacked since the military crackdown on the Brotherhood. The Christians, the Copts, which we have over 9 million of them, have been attacked, beaten, many killed. There were 43 police funerals in Cairo yesterday, and it wasn't the little green aliens who killed these cops. It was the extremists, the Muslim Brotherhood, and others who support them. And there are no clear boundaries between the Muslim Brotherhood and more radical organizations like Gamma Islamiyah, the Islamic Society, if you wish, that also have killed people, have killed pro-democracy and pro-army protesters in the past. So to unilaterally denounce the military and large numbers of secular Egyptians, I think is wrong and disregards the long-term U.S. interest and policy in the Middle East.
Well, you bring up a couple good points, and I'm trying to figure out exactly what our policy is with regards to Egypt right now, because it seems like it's changed several times, or, at this point it's almost like the president's not willing to take a side or take a chance on supporting what is actually to the benefit of Egypt, and that would be a non-Islamic type government that you'd find in the Muslim
Well,
Brotherhood.
I do not see the president and the administration clearly saying that a government dominated by religious extremists in Egypt, or for that matter in Syria or anywhere else, is against the interests of the West, broadly defined, is against our democratic principles, and against the U.S. interests. I think we're all over the place. We want to talk to the Iranians. We don't want to talk to the Iranians. We impose sanctions on the Iranians, but we welcome a non-democratic election that brought Rouhani as the president, a so-called president, because the real power in Iran, of course, as you know, is not in the hands of the president. In Egypt, we managed to get the Muslim Brotherhood, the military, and the secular opposition to the Muslim Brotherhood all denouncing the United States. I long for the days of that retired naval officer and social conservative Jimmy Carter, when our position in the Middle East was much clearer, although, of course, Carter made tremendous mistakes, including in Iran. But this is policy in disarray. This is a policy where there's no clear leadership. And while all this is going on, Secretary Kerry is spending his precious time in this diplomatic graveyard known as the Arab-Israeli peace process. What's up with that? You have Syria going up in smoke. You have Egypt going up in smoke. You go capital after capital. I was talking to my wife last night. I said, look at this. A huge explosion in Beirut, 40 people murdered in Baghdad, 400 people or more, 600 people killed in Cairo. Yemen is a mess. Libya is a mess. And we're spending all our diplomatic capital in Jerusalem and Jericho and Ramallah.
Yeah, that's a great point, Ariel. And when we look at all this, we were joking around, but we had a show about 2 weeks ago that we entitled, "This is what Jimmy Carter's second term would look like on steroids." And the sad truth is that it's way beyond that. And
yes.
Exactly.
Exactly. And beyond that, it's not just the Middle East. Look at the relationship with Russia. The Obama administration trumpeted, and we talked about this on this show, they trumpeted their reset policy with Russia. And now with Snowden and with Russian support of the Assad regime in Syria and the domestic crackdown, this policy is also in tatters. So what else do they have to do? I mean, this is like Obamacare in foreign policy. This is a disaster.
Well, it is, and I'm glad that you mentioned Russia because I could see Russia playing a larger role going forward in Egypt because Egypt can't count on us for, it's one thing if you do the wrong thing, but right now it's almost like we're not doing anything. We're running around like a chicken with our head cut off. And it's not for good policy at all. And when your friends or even your somewhat friends can't even trust you or trust what may come about from you, it's a very bad situation.
But let's walk this through. I mean, you're bringing a very valid point about loyalty to friends. Let's walk this through. In 2011, it took the administration something like a week to disengage from President Hosni Mubarak, who was a faithful American ally for 30 years. So the administration made its bet on the Arab Spring, so-called, and I deliberately put quotes on the Arab Spring. Somebody probably would call it Arab chaos. This was a signal that America cannot be relied upon by those in the Middle East who worked with us in the war against terrorism and on Arab-Israeli peace agreements that involve Jordan and Egypt. Then the military. People in the Egyptian military, senior officers, are all American trained. They rely on American weapons. And now we start telling them how to run their country. Yes, it is unpleasant, to say the least, to see 500 people gunned down, but let's remember that many of these were violent and others had firearms they used against the police and the security force. The authorities in Egypt told these people to disperse. They did not. And yeah, I would, if they asked my opinion, which they didn't, I would recommend much heavier use of water cannon, of tear gas, and maybe of rubber bullets if push comes to shove, and not live ammo. The other thing they probably did wrong was deploying deploying troops, and probably crack troops, elite troops, as opposed to trained anti-riot police and SWAT teams. So this was an obvious mistake. Other countries in the Middle East and elsewhere make these mistakes regularly. The Russians, for example, regularly kill hostages together with hostage takers. But, the world is not perfect. And we need to look at these things strategically. I hate to tell you that, but the Russians were looking at this strategically. They were recognizing the Sunni extremist threat inherent in the Arab Spring, and they were against the rise of the Muslim Brotherhood, which puts Russia now square in the camp of the military. So what can they do? What can the Russians do here? They can sell grain, either subsidized or even at market prices that Egypt need, and they can sell it at market prices with long-term credit. I won't be surprised if Cairo goes to Russia to buy grain. And secondly, they can replace us in many types of weaponry that we may refuse to sell to Egypt. Not that Egypt needs so much weaponry if they're taking their peace treaty with Israel seriously. And in terms of riot control and killing the opposition, the Russians could care less, just like they don't care if Assad killed over 100,000 of their own people. They believe that whatever appears as a legitimate government, and they see the Assad regime as a legitimate government, they will see the military regime in Egypt as a legitimate government, and they will support them because in the long term, geopolitically, Syria, Egypt, Iraq count a lot in the Middle East. They have resources, they have population, and they have geopolitical location, such as Suez Canal, such as a long coastline along the eastern Mediterranean, and that's what Moscow wants.
Well, Ariel, terrific points. When you look at geographically, when you look at the Middle East, it's like a giant railway hub, right, that connects Asia and Africa and the Far East. And you're right.
And it has tons of oil. It has more oil than any other region in the world.
Exactly, and this is not just a land bridge. This also has to do with the Suez Canal. So I'm glad you brought up the point you did about the president, basically tiptoeing in the Palestinian graveyard, which is a complete and total waste of time. Because the larger point that you just brought up, I see three major areas, and I want to get your comment on this. There are three large-scale battles that are occurring here, and I believe this president has taken a giant step back in all three. The first is the leveraging the natural tension between the Sunnis and the Shia and trying to fight Iran. The second is the general broader goal of an Islamic caliphate against the Western liberal democracies. And the third is... And by the way,
against Russia and China. And
exactly.
India.
And the third... Right, and the third, though, ironically enough, is the USA versus sort of the China-Russia-Iranian bloc. And I wanted you to kind of comment on all three of those because I think they all very closely tie into this, and I want to get your opinion.
Well, in the long term, the Russians view the United States as their strategic adversary, and I think the Chinese probably do too. Again, in the long term, 20 years, 30 years, it is probably China that is going to be the main competitor to the United States. Russia just doesn't have the economic power. It has the size, but it doesn't have the population. The population is getting older and is in decline. The Russian population started after the collapse of the Soviet Union at 148. It's probably about 141 now. So it's in a strong decline trend, and also the internal Christian Orthodox versus Sunni Muslim dynamic is not in favor of ethnic Russians. So the Russians are not doing great, but they still see us and not China and not the Muslim world as the main threat. I think they're deeply mistaken in that. And they also think that they can be fortress Russia and stand against everybody. They just recently, a couple of weeks ago, held the largest military exercise since the end of the Cold War. Guess where? In eastern Siberia and the Far East. So clearly, that was a signal to the Chinese, with whom they have excellent relationship. But nevertheless, it was a signal to the Chinese, don't even think about military adventure or expansion into the Russian territory. So they think they can stand against the Chinese, against the West, and against the Muslim world, all by their own little self, and this is just not realistic. In terms of the Sunni versus Shia divide, I think you put your finger on something absolutely crucial, and a lot of people still don't understand, including, I think, in our government, don't understand that this is a 1,300-year conflict that had its ebbs and flows, but right now it's exploding, literally, with car bombs, just like yesterday in Beirut, in the stronghold of Hezbollah. The Sunnis blew up a huge car bomb with 200 people killed, I think. Iran, of course, is the Shia fortress, and they are hell-bent on getting nuclear weapons. The Saudi Arabia and the Emirates are the Sunni anchor, and Qatar is sort of floating around in between because the Qataris are the sugar daddies and the underwriters of the Muslim Brotherhood, the same forces that came to power in Egypt and were removed, but also Hamas in Gaza. And very close to the Muslim Brotherhood are the folks who are running Turkey today. So you have a strange arrangement in which the Muslim Brotherhood forces. Turkey, Egypt, some of the rebels in Syria are closest to Qatar and to the United States. Then others are close to Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and the United Arab Emirates. And still others, of course, are Shia, and in case of Shia and the Alawis in Syria, are also close to Russia. And if I confused you and the listeners, I apologize. And this is just an indication how really complex today's world is.
Well, Ariel, I know you can't stay all that long with us, and I think the confusion is warranted because it's such an important issue and people have to take advantage of it. The final question I was actually going to ask you is, I think there's a fascinating advantage that this president has given to Iran. He's basically opened the door wide open for Iran to realign itself with the Muslim Brotherhood, which had fallen apart because of their conflict with Hezbollah. And now Iran can easily become a destabilizing force in Egypt at a U.S. demise. I want to get your opinion on that.
The question is what the leadership of the Muslim Brotherhood and their religious guides, their religious senior types like Sheikh Qaradawi, the famous preacher, and others, what are they going to say about that? Because the Muslim Brotherhood leadership broke the relations with Syria and was as involved or was gearing up to be as involved in Syria as the Turkey government is. The Turks, of course, are supporting Islamist forces, including the Brotherhood, but also some extremists in Syria. So the conflict between Iran and the Muslim Brotherhood is over Syria right now, and it is the essence of the Sunni Shia extremism conflict. The current Egyptian government and the military is not as keen to support the Islamists in Syria. They're not as keen to support Hamas. And paradoxically, some of the very radical Sunni forces, the Salafis, the Wahhabis from Saudi Arabia, in that are aligned with the Egyptian military, but not aligned with the United States.
No, that's a great breakdown for us, Ariel Cohen. I want to thank you so much for joining us, and I want to give you a special plug because I think everybody listening should find you on Facebook and follow you because almost every day you're posting some very important information and different articles, especially with regards to Russia, Asia, and Middle East. So great stuff as always. And Ariel Cohen with the Heritage Foundation, thank you so much.
Thank you, and let everybody have a wonderful weekend.
Sure will. All right, you too, Ariel. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Again, you can go to heritage.org, type in Ariel Cohen up in their search box. You can find him and all of his recent articles and whatnot. Great stuff as always, and he is so well-versed in so many different areas of this. You talk about everything with him. In fact, if we had a 3-hour show, we could probably go on with Ariel for 3 hours with no problem whatsoever.